Welcome to our deep dive on Houston.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about this city, beyond the whole space cowboy image. But to be honest, my knowledge is pretty much limited to the Johnson Space Center
hmm
and the fact that you need industrial strength air conditioning to survive a summer there.
Right.
Luckily, I've got an expert here to guide us through some of the fascinating history and facts about Houston.
Happy to be here. And yeah, there's a lot more to Houston than meets the eye. It's a city that constantly surprises you.
Okay, so let's rewind to the beginning. Where does the story of Houston even start?
Well, picture this. It's 1836, just a few months after Texas wins its independence from Mexico. Two brothers, Augustus and John Kirby Allen, show up with a vision. They buy a plot of land along Buffalo Bayou, and get this, just 4 days later, their first advertisement for Houston hits the streets. Talk about a quick turnaround.
4 days.
4 days.
That's some serious entrepreneurial hustle.
It is.
They were clearly convinced that they had struck gold.
They were. And they were smart about it. They named the new town after Sam Houston, the hero of the Texas Revolution, a move that definitely gave them some clout.
So Houston becomes the temporary capital of the Republic of Texas, right?
Yeah.
What happened after that?
It was a roller coaster ride. They had big plans, laid out the streets in a grid pattern, built a port. But then in 1839, a devastating yellow fever epidemic hit,
Oh, wow.
killing about 1 in 8 residents. It was a huge setback.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine a young town facing such a tragedy.
It really tested their resilience. But here's where that partnership with Galveston comes in. Houston became this inland hub for trade, with farmers bringing their produce down Buffalo Bayou to be shipped out from the port of Galveston. It was a win-win situation for both cities.
So even in those early days, that commercial spirit that focused on trade and making things happen was already ingrained in Houston's DNA.
Absolutely. And that's a theme that continues to define the city even today.
Now, when most people think of Houston, they think oil and gas. But I was reading that Houston's economy is way more diverse than that. What are some of the other big players?
Right. Houston has definitely moved beyond its oil town image.
Yeah.
Take the Texas Medical Center, for example. It's the largest medical complex in the world, employing over 120,000 people. Healthcare is a massive force in Houston's economy.
120,000 people.
120,000 people.
That's mind-blowing. I knew it was big, but that's a whole city within a city.
Exactly. And it's not just about size, it's also a global leader in research and innovation. But even beyond healthcare, Houston's economy is incredibly diverse and resilient. It's consistently ranked among the top cities in the U.S. for job creation, even bouncing back strong after economic downturns.
So what's the secret sauce? What makes Houston so adaptable?
Well, a couple things. First, Houston has always been open to international business, attracting investment and talent from around the world. And second, it's home to a highly diverse population, with people from all sorts of backgrounds bringing their skills and entrepreneurial spirit to the table.
That makes sense. Diversity breeds innovation, as they say. Speaking of doing things differently, I was intrigued to learn that Houston doesn't have traditional zoning laws. How does that impact the city?
That's a fascinating aspect of Houston. It's a bit of a Wild West approach to development, which has had some interesting consequences. On the one hand, it's contributed to affordable housing since there are fewer restrictions on what can be built where. But on the other hand, it's also led to some challenges like urban sprawl and increased vulnerability to flooding.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Right.
You get flexibility and affordability, but also potentially more risk.
Exactly. It's a trade-off that Houstonians are constantly grappling with. And it's a great example of how Houston does things its own way, for better or for worse.
So what's it actually like to live in Houston? Beyond the industries and the economy, what's the vibe?
Well, first and foremost, be prepared for the weather. We're talking hot and humid summers where the temperature regularly hits 90 degrees or higher for over 100 days a year.
Yeah.
Air conditioning is not a luxury, it's a necessity.
I've heard the stories.
Yeah.
You practically need an urban sombrero, as you said earlier, to survive the heat.
Definitely. But once you've adjusted to the climate, you'll find that Houston has a unique charm. It's a city that's both laid back and energetic, diverse, and welcoming.
And what about the cultural scene? What are some of the things that make Houston culturally unique?
Houston has a vibrant and eclectic cultural scene that reflects its diverse population. You've got everything from the world-famous Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, which draws millions of visitors every year, to the colorful Houston Gay Pride Parade, a celebration of the city's inclusivity.
So there's a real sense of community and celebration in Houston.
Absolutely. And that community spirit extends to the arts as well. Houston has a thriving theater district, a world-class museum district, and a music scene that's constantly evolving.
I'm hearing a lot about diversity being a key ingredient in Houston's success story.
That's right. Houston's strength lies in its ability to embrace different cultures, perspectives, and ideas. It's a city that's always looking forward, always innovating, and that's what makes it so exciting. You know, we were talking about how Houston does things its own way. Well, that independent spirit is also reflected in its architecture.
Oh, tell me about it. I was looking at some pictures of the skyline, and it's quite a mix. You've got these sleek, modern skyscrapers like the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, the tallest in Texas.
Right. And then right next to them, you might find a historic building from the 19th century or a postmodern structure with all sorts of curves and angles.
It's definitely not a city that's afraid to experiment with different styles.
Mm.
But speaking of Houston's unique character, I have to ask about those fault lines running right through the city. It's not exactly what you expect to hear about a place that's not known for earthquakes.
I know, right? It's one of those hidden quirks that make Houston so fascinating. There are actually quite a few active faults crisscrossing the area, but here's the thing. They move very slowly, so slowly that it's called fault creep.
Fault creep. What does that mean exactly?
It means that the ground is constantly shifting, but in such a gradual way that it doesn't typically cause major earthquakes. It's like a slow motion dance of the tectonic plates.
So Houston is built on a foundation that's always on the move, but in a way that's not likely to shake things up too much. That's kind of reassuring, actually.
Yeah. It is. It's just another example of how Houston defies expectations. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about some of the challenges the city faces. We touched on flooding earlier, and I know that's a major concern, especially with climate change and the increasing intensity of hurricanes.
Absolutely. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 was a stark reminder of how vulnerable Houston is to flooding.
It was devastating, and it really highlighted the complex factors that contribute to Houston's flood risk, from its flat geography and rapid development to its unique relationship with its bayous.
Bayous. Those are those slow-moving waterways that wind through the city.
Right?
I've seen pictures and they look quite picturesque.
They are, and they play a crucial role in Houston's ecosystem, providing drainage and habitat for wildlife. But they can also become serious flood risks when heavy rains overwhelm their capacity.
So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
You need the bayous for drainage, but they can also pose a threat during extreme weather events.
Exactly. And it's something that city planners and engineers are constantly working to address with strategies like improving drainage systems, restoring wetlands, and implementing stricter building codes in flood-prone areas. But it's an ongoing challenge.
And it's not just about managing the water. It's also about making sure that development doesn't exacerbate the problem.
That's right. There's a lot of debate about how to balance the need for growth with the need to protect the environment and mitigate flood risks. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Speaking of complex issues, air pollution is another challenge Houston has been grappling with, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Houston often ranks among the most ozone-polluted cities in the U.S., largely due to emissions from the massive industrial complex along the Houston Ship Channel.
So it's a combination of factors, industry traffic, and even the hot, sunny weather that contributes to ozone formation.
Exactly. And it's a serious public health concern, especially for vulnerable populations like children and the elderly.
What steps are being taken to address this issue?
Well, the city has implemented a number of initiatives to improve air quality, including stricter emission standards for industries promoting public transportation and encouraging the use of electric vehicles. There's also a growing focus on renewable energy sources like solar and wind power.
So it's a multi-pronged approach tackling the problem from different angles.
It has to be. Improving air quality is a long-term challenge that requires collaboration between government, industry, and citizens.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about Houston's people. I know it's one of the most diverse cities in the country, but I'm curious about the specifics. What are some of the major demographic groups that make up Houston's population?
Well, according to the 2020 census, Hispanics, or Latinos of any race, are the largest group, making up almost half of Houston's population.
Wow, almost half. That's incredible. What about other groups?
Non-Hispanic whites make up about a quarter of the population. Black or African Americans represent about 22%, and Asian Americans comprise about 7%.
It's amazing to see such a mix of cultures and backgrounds.
Yeah.
How has this diversity shaped Houston's culture and identity?
Houston's diversity is woven into the very fabric of the city. It's reflected in the food, the music, the art, the festivals, you name it. It's a city where you can experience the world without leaving its borders.
And it's not just about cultural expression, it's also about economic opportunity. Right? I'm thinking back to what we discussed earlier about Houston's resilience and its ability to attract talent and investment from around the world.
Absolutely. Houston's diversity is a key driver of its economic success. It fosters innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And it creates a welcoming and inclusive environment that attracts people from all walks of life.
It sounds like Houston is a shining example of how diversity can be a strength, both culturally and economically.
It really is. It's a city that celebrates its differences and embraces the richness that comes from having so many perspectives and traditions coming together.
I'm starting to get a sense of why people are so drawn to Houston. It's a city that's not afraid to be different, to embrace its quirks, and to constantly evolve.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so exciting to explore. There's always something new to discover, something that surprises you, something that challenges your preconceived notions.
I'm ready for more surprises. What else can you tell me about this city that's constantly defying expectations? We've talked about Houston's history, its economy, its challenges, and its people.
Right.
But now I'm ready to dive into some of the more, shall we say, unconventional aspects of Houston.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that it's a city that embraces its quirks.
It definitely does, and some of those quirks are downright fascinating. We've already touched on the National Museum of Funeral History, which is definitely not your average museum.
Yeah, a museum dedicated to the history of death and burial practices, complete with a collection of vintage hearses and a Pope-mobile. It's definitely unique.
It is. It's a perfect example of Houston's willingness to embrace the unexpected. But here's another one for you, the Houston Art Car Parade. It's basically a giant mobile art exhibit where people decorate their cars, trucks, bikes, anything with wheels, and parade them through the streets.
Wait, seriously? Like, people go all out decorating their vehicles?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking elaborate sculptures, flashing lights, political statements, pop culture references, you name it. It's a celebration of creativity, self-expression, and pure Houston weirdness.
That sounds incredible. I can totally see how that would capture Houston's spirit. It's not a city that takes itself too seriously.
Exactly. It's a city that knows how to have fun, and that's reflected in its arts and culture scene. Speaking of which, we haven't talked much about music yet, and Houston has a rich musical history beyond just country and western.
Oh, right.
Oh.
You mentioned earlier that Houston has a vibrant hip-hop scene.
Yes, and it's not just any hip-hop scene. Houston is the birthplace of a unique subgenre called chopped and screwed music.
Chopped and screwed. I'm not familiar with that. What's the story there?
Well, back in the 1990s, a legendary DJ named DJ Screw started experimenting with slowing down the tempo of songs and adding these trippy sound effects.
Yeah.
It created this hypnotic, almost psychedelic sound that became a signature of Houston hip-hop.
Wow, so Houston played a role in shaping the evolution of hip-hop music. That's pretty cool.
It is. And DJ Screw's legacy continues to inspire artists in Houston and beyond. He's a true local legend.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from Houston's entrepreneurial beginnings to its diverse economy, its complex challenges, its vibrant culture, and even its quirky side. What are some of your key takeaways from this deep dive?
For me, it's been fascinating to see how Houston's past has shaped its present. From those early days of hustling to establish a trading hub to its embrace of diversity and innovation, Houston has always been a city that's not afraid to push boundaries and do things its own way.
I agree, and it's a city that's full of surprises. I came into this deep dive with some preconceived notions, but Houston has definitely challenged them. I've learned so much about its history, its resilience, its creativity, and its unique character.
And that's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It allows you to go beyond the surface and really get a sense of what makes a place tick.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring. Dig deeper into the stories that sparked your curiosity. Seek out those hidden gems and experience the magic of Houston for yourselves.
You might just be surprised by what you discover.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Houston. Thanks for joining us today.